I have a surprisingly large amount of alphabet dies in my stash, despite the fact that for the longest time I found them super tedious and annoying to use because they kind of slip and slide around. It's hard to line them up, get even spacing. It seems very technical for something that seems so simple. So in today's video, I'm going to show you a bunch of hacks on how you can line up, space out your alphabet dies, and get them to work in a way that's less frustrating than probably what you're doing already. Now, why do I even have alphabet dies, do you ask, if they're annoying and tedious? Well, I love using alphabet dies to create custom cards with people's names on them. Think about inside jokes. Maybe you're lacking a sentiment in your stash that you really want to use, but you don't have it and you're only going to use it once, so why invest in it? Or in my case, sometimes I need sentiments in other languages and they're not available, or I just don't want to buy them to create 1 or 2 cards a year. So let's dive into the hacks and get started. Now, probably one of the most common ways to line up your alphabet dies is to use something like the grid on your glass mat or your cutting mat. This way you can choose a line on your grid mat or cutting mat and line them up by putting on the letters directly on the line, and then you can pick them up using tape. Of course, you're going to want to have them flip the other way because the way I have them right now is cutting side up. And probably one of the most basic ways to line them up if you don't have a grid mat or a cutting mat or don't like that method is to grab yourself a piece of removable tape, purple tape, yellow tape, mint tape. It's all different colors depending on the company, but just something that's not going to stick and tear your paper. So what you're going to do is line up your dies, and you can line them up from the first letter to the last letter, especially if you have a surface where you know for sure all of these letters fit without any issue whatsoever. It's pretty easy to line them up just by lining them up at the bottom of the tape and adding them to your card. Now, if you do have a limited amount of space, I would suggest going to the surface that you're going to be attaching the letters to or cutting the letters out of and just lining them up here. And what I do is I line up the first and the last letter first, and then I add the center letter so I can get even spacing between the letters, because that's just as important as lining them up straight. Now, this is really easy because there's just 3 letters, but that's just one way to do it. First and last letter, and then line up the center and go from there. And we'll go into some more complex ones in a bit. Now, what happens if you need to have a die or a sentiment that has the same letter more than once? Now, of course, you could just kind of eyeball it and leave some space, but what I like to do is I like to cut them out of Post-it notes here so that I have the letter cut, and what I'm able to do then when I have the letter cut is I'm able to line up the sentiment and use the Post-it note as a placeholder so I know just about where I need to cut this out of and how much space I need in between. Now, some companies are really smart and include 2 dies of the most popular letters, but those are really few and far between, so this is a really great solution. So in this case, I wanted to make a card for my mom, and she's a grandma now, so she's called Nona, and I needed that N 3 times, and this technique came in really handy. Okay, so odd lettered sentiments are really easy to line up and get the even spacing, but what about even letters? So let's talk about how you would go about doing that. And this is another way that you can do this, adding them to a Post-it note, lining up the dies on the edge of the Post-it note, making sure they overlap a sticky part, and then you're able to line them up really easily as well. So I put the first and the last letter, and then I take the 2 middle letters and place them in the center with the spacing that I think will be appropriate. And then I go ahead and add any other letters that I need off to the side between the sentiment the first and the last letter. And then I can adjust the spacing of those middle letters as needed if it needs to be done this way. But I always find first and last letter first, add the middle, whether it's 1 letter or 2, and then go from there. All right, so what happens if you go to add a sentiment and it actually is a little bit too small for the area that you want and the spacing looks really weird? So in this case, I'm going to be adding "for you" to the card. Don't ask me why I put the R down there, but I decided to add a little heart to the center to kind of even things up and add a little bit of space. So don't forget to use some basic shapes. Hearts, stars, things like that can help you as space fillers if you need be. And you'll see here I'm adding the first and the last letters, and then I'm adding the center letter in there, again getting the even spacing from left to right. There are so many ways to use your alphabet dies. For example, here with colored cardstock, mixing and matching different fonts looks absolutely amazing. You can cut your letters out of any type of background that you've created. Ink blending, stenciled backgrounds, or patterned paper work really well. And that way you'll get letters that aren't just a simple solid color, but have a pattern in them. It's great for the spotlight technique. You can cut them all out of white cardstock and use your ink blending tool to add ink, whether you create a gradient pattern or just solid colors. Cut them out of washi tape like I did on this card, or you can even emboss them. So I added some repositionable adhesive to the back of these letters and attach them to some copy paper just to kind of hold them in place. And then you can go ahead and add your embossing powder on top. Feel free to cut them also out of a stamped sentiment or a stamped image as well and just raise them up using some 3D foam tape or alcohol inked backgrounds. There's just so many possibilities that you could do with your alphabet dies. They're just super versatile. And don't forget, if you're ever working on a busy background and you want to add letter dies, just attach them to some vellum. And the nice thing is you can glue behind the letters to attach the vellum to your card easily. And that way they'll pop up and not get lost on your card. Now the next technique is really cool, but I need your attention for a sec. All right, I need 20 seconds of your time just to hear me out. If you take a look at this statistic of people who are subscribed that are watching and unsubscribed, if all of those people who were unsubscribed just hit the subscribe button, I would hit my 100,000 goal in no time. Actually, I would hit it within the week. So I would absolutely love it and appreciate it if you get tips and love my videos that you hit the subscribe button so that I can hit my goal of the 100,000 followers. All right, so I thought I would show something else that is really, really neat to do with your cards, and that is to create yourself sort of a masked area. And you can do this with embossing powder, you can do this with ink blending or anything like that. But don't forget, if you're using larger alphabet dies, that you have a lot more detail that can show through. So these are really good to use with things like pattern paper, ink blended backgrounds, stenciled backgrounds, something like that, because you can really see the pattern in the letters. If you were to take super skinny letters or super small letters, then the detail kind of gets lost, right? So let's go in and mask off an area about 1 inch wide, and I'm going to add some embossing ink through there, pushing quite hard. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the masking tape that I have put down here, and I'm going to add my embossing powder to it. And then I'm going to go ahead and just take off all the excess embossing powder. You'll see I have a nice line there. And if you don't get a nice clean line, just grab a dry paintbrush and remove any embossing powder you don't want. And you're just going to heat this up here until it's nice and shiny. You can add your letters by eyeballing things, or of course you can use a ruler if you prefer, just to kind of butt up against the surface, or a book will even work. And then I'm just going to line these up on the line so that they are all the same length, and add a piece of tape to keep them in place. So I always like to add tape to keep my alphabet dies in place when I run them through my die cutting machine. Oftentimes I'll even put multiple pieces of tape to be sure, and then you'll have these really cool letters that are partially heat embossed and partially not for a nice, clean and simple card. For me personally, one of the reasons why I love alphabet dies is to customize cards with people's names, maybe an inside joke, or when I need them in another language, as I mentioned before. And my favorite types of cards to create are these ones here with people's names on them, and creating a shaker, because I don't know and I don't care how old you are, everybody loves a shaker card. I talk about that all the time. They're just so much fun. Hope you found the hacks in this video super useful. Meet me over here in this video if you'd like to see more of those custom shaker cards with personalized names on them in greater detail. I'll see you over there.